All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Taylor Coffee Hour. Of course, I'm your host, Akeem Clark, and with me, I have a panel of experts in their own rights. But before I introduce the panel, what's a topic for discussion? Vaccine controversies, hesitance, mandates, rights, and inequities. All right, let me introduce the panel. I have with me, I think, Dr. Dr. Melody Ennis is supposed to be with us very soon, but Dr. Ennis is the Director of Family Health Services in the Ministry of Health and Wellness. I have also with me Mr. Mutundo Mukulu. Mr. Mukulu rather, is authorized to practice law in both Jamaica and England. Over the years, he has penned several articles on issues related to Caribbean public constitutional law, which is one of his areas of professional interest. He's a proud father of three daughters and has had the privilege of once serving as Jamaica's deputy public defender. Mr. Mukulu is addicted to his support for West Indies cricket team, and his greatest honor, apart from being a father, is to have an active is to being an active witness to his parents' practical commitment to raising their children. Also with us, we have Dr. Kia Duncan. Of course, Dr. Duncan was trained at the University of the West Indies and is currently pursuing her master's in public health at the University of Liverpool. She can be described as a woman of many hats, as she is a member of the Medical Association of Jamaica Ethics Committee of Association of Surgeons, Fellow of American Academy of ENT, Fellow of American Rhinological Society, member of the American Head and Neck Society, member of the European Academy of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, and social media manager of Jamaica Association of ENT and Head and Neck Surgeons. This profound healthcare worker is a philanthropist, advocate, avid sport lover, mother, mother and ears, throat and nose specialist, which is ENT, physician and surgeon, using her virtual and using your virtual hands rather, please help me welcome Mr. Matunda Mukulu and Dr. Kia Duncan. Welcome.
Hi, good afternoon.
All right, good afternoon. All right, so let's get into it. All right, now, vaccine. Now, it's one of the biggest controversies right now. I think that apart from the fear of COVID-19, there's also a fear of vaccine. So let us start, and I want Dr. Duncan to just answer this one for us, and perhaps Mr. Mukulu, are these vaccines actually safe?
All right, so yes, they are safe. Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm hearing you.
Okay, so yes, they are safe. So these vaccines, the whole technology with the current vaccines is not new. It's actually something that over 20 years. So it's not a sudden thing where it just, let's just make mRNA. So we've been actually looking at mRNA vaccines for coronaviruses for at least over 20 years. So it has been studied over and over effectively in different labs and gone through the phases of studying vaccines, and they are safe.
I think I don't know if it's my internet, but I think you're breaking up a little. Am I the only one experiencing that? All right.
Okay.
So let me move over a little to Dr. Ennis. Dr. Ennis is with us. Dr. Ennis, are these vaccines safe?
The vaccines, good afternoon, the vaccines are indeed quite safe. As was stated, the vaccines have been in the process of being made for over 20 years. The other method or platform that's used, which is the viral vector technology, is also not new. It is the platform that was used and continues to be used to make the Ebola virus vaccine. So we have to also remember that in order for vaccines as well as other medications to come on the market to be approved for use, they must go through the steps. There are 3 or 4 major steps that must happen, and you must pass each step before you can get to the next. You have to get that passing grade. So initially, you have your preclinical trials, and that's done with your monkeys and mice, and they have to live. They have to be okay. And then you move on to your clinical trials, which have 3 phases. The phase 1 trial is where you're just wetting your foot in the water, so to speak. Is it okay for humans to take it? And these humans may get trial that they are, tried with the disease. How do they withstand? Same with the vaccine. They survive, they're okay, and therefore we move on to the next phase, phase 2 of the clinical trials, which now again continues to look at safety of the vaccines, as well as the dose that might elicit that immune response, or that will make us or prevent us from becoming severely ill. Now, again, safety priority. It happens in phase 2. And then we move on to phase 3. Once we have passed phase 2, we move on to phase 3 of the trials. And this is where now thousands of persons across the world is exposed to your vaccine to ensure that the effect it has on a Black person in the Caribbean is the same that it will have as an Eskimo, is the same that it will have on somebody in Madagascar, who of course are exposed to different environmental conditions, different cultural backgrounds, different foods, etc. And once it has been found to be safe in all of those persons, as well as the effects can be replicated, it is at that point that you get to emergency use authorization, or now it being able to be used across nations. So all of those steps, but I want to just say one last thing about phase 3. That is the step that usually takes about 10 to 12 years. That one phase, phase 3. And everybody's asking, so one phase takes 12 years. How did this vaccine come around so quickly? It cannot be safe. Well, phase 3 is the phase that, as I said, different persons must respond the same way. And when you did not have a pandemic, it was very difficult to find people across the world exposed to your disease that would come into your study. Now, that did not happen last year. Last year, every nook and cranny of the world had COVID. And therefore, you could get your 30,000 persons for Moderna, 40,000 persons for Astra, 100,000 persons. So what would normally take 12 years, we were able to do that in a matter of weeks. 4 to 6 weeks, you could get those persons. So the vaccines are indeed safe, and none of the steps to make them have been skipped.
Hakeem, your mic is off. Your mic is off.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Ennis, for that information. And I do have a follow-up question. But before I get to you, I'm going to bring Mr. Mukulu into the conversation. Mr. Mukulu, you're someone who's aware of public affairs and public knowledge and all of that. Do you believe that sufficient information is out there about the safety of the vaccine? Because here we are now with Dr. Ennis sharing with us all the steps that a vaccine has to go through in order for it to be approved. But do you think that sufficient information is out in the public about the safety of these vaccines?
Well, good afternoon to everyone, and good afternoon to fellow guests. I don't know if I can honestly answer and say yes or no to that, but I do say, given the prevalence of what I call false information, there is an obligation, especially in countries like ours, developing countries, for those persons with the information, or institutions, I should say, with the information such as that which Dr. Ennis gave us just now, to put that information out there more aggressively, so that the degree of hesitancy can be at least attempted at, we can attempt to reduce it. I'm not so sure that it will make a grand difference in terms of dealing with the hesitancy, because some of the hesitancy has nothing to do with people's knowledge of the stages of testing. Some of it is based on religious, and some of it is frankly based on fantasy. So I'm not so sure we can make the claim that there is insufficient information, because ever since round about what month we're in now, we're in December, thereabout. I think it was just over a year ago that the first vaccine came on stream, certainly in the developed world. And since then, a lot of information has been put out there, and people have seen where different countries, for example, in Austria, 66%, in the UK, the rate of take-up has been high. And that's an example. Those are examples. But people, especially in developing countries like ours, are still sort of in their silos, defending at times some ignorant positions that are not influenced by any knowledge. So I'm not sure it's a lack of information. There's an abundance of misinformation, I accept.
All right, thank you so much for that input, Mr. Mukolo. We're gonna stick a little on this idea of facts of hesitancy. Now, a lot of persons decide that they will not take the vaccine simply because the vaccine doesn't actually prevent them from being infected with the virus. I mean, in the past, vaccines for diseases such as polio and lockjaw would have worked or prevented the illnesses. What do you think let me phrase it better. How do you go about to get these persons to actually take the vaccine, given that the vaccine doesn't prevent you from actually catching the virus? What can be done to convince these persons to actually take the vaccine? And this is open to both Dr. Duncan and Dr. Ennis.
All right, let me try. First of all, let's correct the premise that vaccine in the past prevented us 100% from getting any disease at all. Really, vaccines have always reduced the severity. There are some vaccines, and I'm glad you mentioned polio, because polio is one of the vaccines that have been modified so many times because there were many breakthrough infections with the polio vaccine. I'm not sure if everybody can remember 2016, right here in country, we had a switch when we introduced the IV inactivated polio vaccine to complement the oral polio, bivalent oral polio vaccine that we were administering, because of the fact that you do and can get those breakthrough infections. The very same thing happens with measles. Fortunately, for the majority of the diseases, you don't really see many breakthroughs, but it is not absolutely correct to say that all the vaccines in the past prevented. They really did reduce the severity of the illness. So having said that, these vaccines are therefore not unique. And it was always said from the outset that the primary function of these vaccines were to reduce the severity of illness, prevent hospitalization, and possibly death from COVID. Now, as we continue to study how all of these vaccines operate, we are now recognizing that persons who are vaccinated, although they can get the disease and spread it, the disease burden, the amount of virus present in their respiratory tract, in the whole respiratory system, is much less. So their ability to spread the disease is reduced, in addition to the fact that once they're vaccinated, they stand a much, much better chance of not being severely ill.
All right. So essentially, the vaccine doesn't protect you 100%, but if you take the vaccine, it does prevent you from perhaps hospitalization and become severely ill. Is that what I'm getting from you, Dr. Ennis? Dr. Ennis?
Dr. Ennis, you're muted.
Oh, oops, I'm sorry. So it prevents you from severe illness, hospitalization, and death from COVID. That's what the vaccines do.
Okay. All right, Dr. Duncan and Mr. Mukolo, how much do you think that distrust, perhaps in the health system, distrust in the government, and perhaps just globally distrust in healthcare, how much do you think that plays a role when it comes down to hesitancy of the uptake of vaccines?
I think Dr. Duncan should go first. I think I'm not a public health expert.
So I can just repeat the question again. Akim, I had to step out a little bit.
Okay, no problem. All right. So we're talking about distrust, all right, in terms of distrust in the public health system, distrust in the global health system. I'm wondering how much do you think that this actually plays a role in terms of hesitancy when it comes on to vaccination?
All right. So I looked at some of the data, some of the studies that were done like by Blue Dots. So it actually does cause a significant amount of hesitancy. And it's not just in Jamaica, it's generally worldwide. There's a distrust that Bill Gates is the one wanting to put in a microchip, that there's some conspiracy with world leaders. So it's not just Jamaica alone. So it's something to do. I mean, I think it's always in public health where you have to just keep on speaking to people, trying to answer their questions to get their trust. I know it's not easy. I know Dr. Ennis is very good with explaining everything, but just to gain their trust by saying it over and over again. That's what I try to do anyway. But I know it's a big issue.
All right, certainly. And let us talk a little bit more. We're still on the matter of, persons being hesitant about taking a vaccine. I don't know if you have the data with you, but like which group would you say, perhaps there's a low uptake of vaccine? Which age group that is?
Right, it's a younger age group, so like your cohort.
I'm not surprised.
Yes.
I'm not surprised.
So I've actually all my talks have been with young people between age 19 to 24, because they're the ones who ask me the most questions about erectile dysfunction, about infertility.
But I mean,
so
it's a bit funny because, yes. So I mean, I find it a bit funny because, a lot of the older folks will always have their little theories and all of that, So
no, it's there as well with the older folks, but they have seen.
But it's not surprise at all. It's not surprising.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I think then because the vaccine would have affected the older folks so much, they'd have become witness per se to the virus itself. So that sort of might be a reason why a lot of older folks are taking up the vaccine. All right, let us look a little bit more about the availability of vaccine, because if we talk about persons being hesitant to take vaccine, then vaccine must be available. Now, do you believe that there's sufficient vaccine available in Jamaica for a wide uptake? Because as it is right now, only 17.3% of our population is vaccinated. So is there an actual availability of vaccine?
Well, Dr. Ennis, you're probably the best
I'm
person.
gonna take that one. Vaccines are available, and might I just brag a little bit? And it's bragging for the government of Jamaica. Do you know that the variety of vaccines that we have here in country is more than many first world countries? I mean, so we have AstraZeneca, we have Pfizer, we have Johnson & Johnson. We will soon be offering Sinopharm. we have Moderna on the cards. So we have the vaccines, and you're gonna next ask about access. So we have increased the access points significantly. When we started out initially, remember it was our health facilities, fixed sites, and then we moved on into non-health fixed sites. We moved then into having blitz operations, opening it to persons in large centers. We added community interventions. We partnered with the private sector to have a private sector vaccine initiative where they go into private companies and vaccinate. Persons don't have to leave work. They can also bring their families along with them to get the vaccine. We expanded further into having the private doctors being able to vaccinate. Persons were always complaining they trust their private doctor and they want to get vaccinated with their private doctors. That was added. We further went on into offering it house to house. We have a system where we collect persons who are shut-ins, who can't come out to us, so they can register. Yes, it's online, but that's not the only modality of registering. We get the names of the shut-ins from the churches, from the NGOs, from our private doctors as partners. So the access and availability of the vaccines are not a challenge at this time.
Okay, and before you go, let's talk just a little bit about, you mentioned a vaccine, the one from China. It's called, let me see,
Sinopharm.
Sinopharm, yes. Tell us just a little bit about that one, because I want to know who have access to that vaccine. And a lot of persons are a bit sketchy about that vaccine and so forth. So perhaps this is a platform to, I guess, encourage persons to actually take up this vaccine once it becomes available, if it is not available at this point in time.
So we have it in country, but we have not, excuse me, we have not started to administer it just yet. That will happen in short order. Now, the Sinopharm vaccine should be music to a lot of persons' ears, because they have been saying, we want a vaccine that use the old platform that was made like the vaccines from before. So the Sinopharm is made like the vaccines from before, or one type of vaccine. So it uses the weakened version of the virus. So it is a live attenuated form. It's the weakened version of the virus that is made into the vaccine. And that platform is the same platform that we used to make measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine that all of us got, used to make yellow fever vaccine that we do get when we're traveling to exotic countries to prevent us from getting yellow fever. So that's the platform that's used. It's stored at 2 to 8. Similar to the others that we have. It's stored at 2 to 8. What else I need to tell you about it? You require 2 doses if you are between the ages of 18 and 60. If you are 60 and over, you will require 3 doses of the Sinopharm vaccine, and that's the primary series.
Okay. All right. Let me move over a little. Thank you so much, Dr. Ennis. Let me move over a little to Dr. Duncan. Dr. Duncan, I just want to know, is it that, now I've heard, persons complaining, there are two things rather coming from the men. They're saying that, they're afraid this vaccine, perhaps, affect their sex drive. And I've heard it from the ladies that this may affect their menstrual cycle. Is there any truth to this?
Okay, so no, it does not affect there's no erectile dysfunction with the vaccine. With COVID though, what they have shown is that especially in young men, that it does affect, cause erectile dysfunction. But the vaccine does not affect men at all. In terms of the menstruation now, it does affect the menstruation, but it doesn't affect fertility. So your period may change in terms of the date, but it doesn't affect your fertility or anything like that, or ability to get pregnant.
All right, thank you. Let me move over now to Mr. Mukula. Let me ask you a question. And so in order for a child to receive vaccine, they have to get, I believe, permission from their parents. Their parents have to accompany them to the vaccination site. If a child wants to take the vaccine and the parent decide that that child will not take the vaccine, is there any form of legal obligation on that parent to ensure that child is vaccinated? Mr. Mukulu?
Oh, there's no legal obligation, because remember that getting the COVID vaccine in the first place is not mandatory in Jamaica. Let's establish that first. But if it is that a child wants to take the vaccine and the parent is opposed to that, and what's her name, Miss Gordon Harris, the children's advocate gets involved, then an application can be made to the court, because there is a clash between the parent and the child, and the child's best interest must dominate in those circumstances. And so that would get the children's advocate involved. But remember, there's no mandatory requirement for vaccinations in Jamaica. So the chance of that happening probably low, but not impossible. But should it happen, there is a legal avenue that the child can pursue. Obviously, that all depends on if it comes to the attention of the children's advocate.
Okay, thank you for that. All right, so and I want to stay with you, Mr. Mukulu, because now what you mentioned, that vaccination is not mandatory in Jamaica, which is right. A lot of companies now, they actually have vaccination mandates where, you know, persons have to be vaccinated rather, to work with these companies. Talk to us about this and the legality of this, and if there's anything about it that goes against one's constitutional rights, anything related to labor law and so forth.
Well, I mean, let's start with the first principle, which is that the employer and the employee will have a contractual relationship. And one of the obligations that every single employee has, is to provide a safe system of work for his or her employees. Yeah. And I suspect most employees will be saying, and are saying at this time, well, if you're not vaccinated, you increase the risk to my staff, and thereby you are exposing me to a degree of liability. Take it on the other side now. How does the worker, the employee, responds to that? Our constitution makes it clear that even within a private sector organization, an employer who is not a state body is obliged to recognize a person's constitutional right, in this case, the right to privacy, or, for example, if someone is saying no to vaccination because of religious grounds. All those things are protected by our constitution. But all rights, I've always said this, all rights have their limitations, and our constitution recognizes that, and I think rightfully so. And if it is that the employer can show, if he or she happens to go to court or is taken to court, can show that this requirement, in whatever form it is something that is, one, there for a objectively justifiable reason, suspect they'll point to their contract and their duty and their obligations to create a safe system of work. And if it can be shown that not only am I pursuing a legitimate objective, which is to protect persons in the employment context, but they will also have to show that the measure, i.e. get vaccinated, is the least intrusive on the right. You're intruding on my right to, say, religious freedom, or my right to privacy, or my right to liberty. If it is that vaccination is the least intrusive way of achieving that, then the court, if they get involved, will say, well, if it's the least intrusive, then there's no breach of your constitutional right, or there's a breach, but the breach is permissible. Now, a lot of that all depends on a lot of factors. Let's broaden it. When we first encountered COVID in Jamaica, in about, I think it's March or April of 2020, the government instituted and utilized a lot of curfews, encouraged mask wearing. I have not, and I am not aware of any empirical studies to show the ineffectiveness of those tools. So if it was to be, if we had a situation where the government says mandatory vaccination, the government will have to show that those systems or tools that were employed were not as effective in preventing the spread of the vaccine, which is the public health concern that the state says it has or will have if there was to be mandatory vaccination, which I hope we don't have to get to that.
All right, thank you so much. Let us look a little bit on a natural immunity. So for the doctors with us, if I got the virus, do I need to take the vaccine?
All right, I'll start, and I'm sure Dr. Ennis will continue. So, all right, so with natural immunity, yes, you can get it, but with COVID, the second time you get COVID is actually maybe worse. So natural immunity does not give a long-lasting effect. It varies among different people.
Sorry, Dr. Duncan, before you get any further, are you saying that we can actually get COVID like more than once? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you can get COVID more than once, and the second time can be more severe. So, and a second point to that, the natural immunity is not consistent with everybody. So even though you can get it, it may not last 6 months, it may not last 3 months. So it's recommended that you still get the vaccine. It's still very important. And Dr. Ennis will sure give you all the reasons why.
So you're absolutely correct. Once you get COVID, you will develop some immunity. That's natural immunity, but we know that immunity wanes over time. 3 months maximum persons are protected. It seems to be now 4 months after you've had COVID. Also, when you get natural immunity, to COVID in particular, it is not a robust type of immunity that is developed that looks at the entire virus. You get an immune response, but there are many variations to what the virus or how the virus presents. Now, when you take the vaccine, which is artificial immunity, you get a more complete look at the spike protein, and you therefore mount a more robust response. We also know that for the 2-dose regime, like AstraZeneca, Pfizer, Moderna, even Sinopharm, about 120 days after you have received just 1 dose, that immune response was up at about 70%. At 120 days, you're down to about 30%. So you do need the second shot to now kick your memory cells into action. And that is what you tend not to get with natural immunity. Those memory cells are not primed into motion, which is what we really want. So artificial immunity, as we know it now with the vaccines, really do help. And the recommendation is that even if you have had COVID, you must still get vaccinated.
All right. So let me ask Mr. Mukulu, are you aware of any vaccine being mandated in the past?
Oh yeah.
Before you answer, could you share to us what was it like? if you're aware of it. Yes.
I wish I was alive in 1853 when England had its first mandatory vaccination, but I wasn't alive at that time, Akeem. Yes, remember in the 19th century, Europe contended with its smallpox, and in 1853 in England, it was mandatory for every child, I think about either 3 or 12, to be vaccinated, and parents would have been fined, I think at that time it was about £1, which in today's money, in US dollars, would be about $179. They would have been fined. But, interestingly, when we fly around, there are countries around the world, long before COVID started, where I think there was a research in 2018 that shows that out of 193 countries, I think 105 of those countries had so what we call pre-landing vaccine requirements. And presently in the United States, long before COVID again, I think 50 in all 50 states, I think the children are required to be vaccinated against I think it's measles and mumps. So some of these things existed long before COVID, but with the advent of the internet, we only look for what we want to find to support some of our conspiracy theories. But no, mandatory vaccinations have happened already. Those who are deep in medical history tell us that. And in February of this year, I think in Austria, they're moving, the law has been passed already, comes into place in Austria. The German parliament, I've been told today, it will be voting in the next week or so to institute mandatory vaccinations. The truth of the matter is, to be honest, those persons who are looking towards it now are looking at the raw data on economics. And if we listen to our Minister of Finance, last budget presentation, he made some very sharp and clear arguments, and just looking at the numbers to see how our economy was impacted by it. And I think those persons who are hesitant, who at the same time telling you that, boy, we can't stay in a lockdown because man have to eat food. If they looked at the data around that, they'll probably take a different view as to, one, their hesitancy, and two, whether or not they would start encouraging their neighbors to get the vaccination.
Profound. Thank you so much. All right. I have two questions coming from the audience. One of the questions is a follow-up question.
Right, Akeem, just
yes, go ahead, Dr. Duncan.
In Jamaica as well, we already have the Public Health Act. I'm sure Dr. Ennis will speak about, where we already have mandatory vaccinations for children before they attend primary school. So it's not new. And Jamaica has been awarded several times by the WHO for having almost 100% vaccination rate for MMR, etc. So it's not new to our population at all, right?
So all of the 10 children antigens are mandatory in this country. Every last one of them. Yeah. You can be fined, you can be brought before the court, you can be fined, and within our law, it is religious reasons are not accepted as a valid reason for not taking vaccines. It's a medical reason you will have to have right here in country. So we already have that. And DACA bragging again, this year Jamaica came third. We didn't make it to first, but we got our award this year for our coverage and surveillance of our childhood vaccine program.
Okay, because the follow-up question would be, how is it, how is the required immunization for school different from vaccine mandates? That was a follow-up, but I think you all nailed it. And just a question coming from the audience, and taking a booster shot, is taking a booster shot a recommendation, or is it of utmost importance? That's a question from our audience on YouTube.
So we have to look at the vaccine that we're talking about. So for the Pfizer vaccine and Johnson & Johnson vaccine, the manufacturers have recommended that booster shots be given Again, booster shots are not anything new. We would have all received our primary series as children, but every time we get a dog bite or a rusty nail juke or something like that, we are running for a tetanus. That's a booster shot. So we know about boosters. They just remind the immune system that, hey, something might be there, stay strong. So the manufacturers for Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson have recommended booster shots, and that's to be approved. What has been approved is the third dose, which is an additional dose to either to all of the vaccines so far to persons who are immunocompromised. These persons did not and cannot mount that full 100 response after they get the primary series, which would be the first 2 shots of the 2-dose series or a 1-shot Johnson & Johnson. They need something else to kick in those memory cells. So that third dose have been approved. Booster now is what they're trying to get to say for the manufacturers, Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson, they have said yes. A lot of persons have been clamoring, why is Jamaica not doing booster shots? Because guess what? Notice I didn't mention AstraZeneca. The manufacturers of AstraZeneca in their studies continue to say that a booster shot is not required. The response that you have up to 9-10 months after getting your AstraZeneca, it is still way up there. So a booster shot for AstraZeneca is not required at this time. So we in Jamaica, the majority of us, 700,000 doses of vaccine administered is of AstraZeneca. So we wouldn't be doing a booster for AstraZeneca because it's not recommended. And for Pfizer, where it is recommended, we are considering it. But guess what? Pfizer says, give the booster shot 6 months after you get the primary series. We started in August. So we don't reach 6 months yet. So even if we're going to give the booster, we're not there, we're not quite there yet. So we have to look at everything in perspective when we're looking at CNN and BBC to, you know, get why we do what we do here in country.
But Doc, I don't want to play the devil's advocate, but don't you think a booster shot would probably bring forth some amount of hesitancy, given that, you know, I've already taken my 2 shot, why a 3rd shot, right? When from the beginning I was told that I just needed 2 shots.
Well, remember I did say that booster shots are not anything new. We all know that over time, we have to remind the immune system to stand strong. I'm not sure, the audience is a young audience, but if anybody can remember 1986, everybody was opening up their mouth to get what? A polio drop, which was a booster because there was an outbreak of polio. We all would have received our primary series and we were told that you needed 5 polio drops at different intervals. But then when there was an outbreak, we had to go and take it again to just get that system at its peak. So it's the same thing. Yes, the primary series work, but with all the variants coming in fast and furious, you want to get to that peak. And if the manufacturers have said, go with a booster, once it's approved by the regulatory authorities and the WHO, then we go ahead with the booster shots.
All right, I have some questions from the audience. Thank you very much, Dr. Ennis. So the first question is, how efficient is a vaccine against a new variant, specifically the Pfizer and AstraZeneca, given that is what we have greater access to here in Jamaica? And we have taken the vaccine already. Will we need to take another for the new variant? So how effective is the vaccine, specifically the Pfizer and AstraZeneca? And do we need to take another shot, or rather, do we need to take, another shot for the new variant?
So far, the data is very, very preliminary and studies are just being done. And it appears that the vaccines are still effective against the variants that have come up along, including the Omicron. But as I said, very, very preliminary data, nothing to run with as yet. Also noted with this new variant is that the severity of the disease doesn't seem to be affected. The severity don't seem to be affected as much as yet. So the vaccines were designed to address severe disease. So they are still working, and we are focusing a lot and talking a lot about boosters and boosters and boosters. So it's 17% of our population are fully vaccinated. So giving them a booster may be okay, but what about the other 70% of persons that are not vaccinated? It is those persons who are vulnerable. So we can't, let me steal a phrase, we can't booster our way out of this pandemic. We have to vaccinate ourselves out of it.
All right, so Dr. Ennis, you certainly have a lot of information, and I'm going to bring in Dr. Duncan and Mr. Mukulu in the discussion. Do you think, though, that the government, the World Health Organization, CDC, all those entities, do you think that they're doing enough in terms of spreading this kind of information to the general public? I know we hinted a little earlier about information and misinformation, but I mean, if perhaps if we didn't have a function like this or an event like this, we probably wouldn't know all these things that Dr. Ennis is sharing. So do you think that there's sufficient public campaign are actually being done to share this type of information with the public? Mr. Mukulu and Dr. Duncan?
If the government, you're asking if the government is doing enough?
In terms of public campaign and public awareness with this kind of information so that persons can be fully aware, you know, of the vaccine, its safety and so forth.
I must admit, I don't live in Jamaica presently. I think it would be wrong of me because I don't have access presently to Jamaican television. I hear stuff on the radio, the Jamaican radio, but I'm not in a position to comment on it. But what I do say is, I'm not so sure, to be honest, when I listen to friends of mine in Jamaica, both within your age group, especially your age group, I'm not so sure it's a case where the government can do much more than it is doing. And I am someone who's harsh on the government. The fact of the matter is, we don't have an access problem on where vaccines are concerned in Jamaica because we're not taking them. We're not taking them. And I'm someone who has children probably closer to your age. Well, my eldest daughter is closer to your age. And she's not hesitant, but a lot of her friends are. Now, you tell me, because you're from the generation who has access to everything online, and somehow none of you seem to be bothered to stumble upon the good information that, for example, that Dr. Ennis has provided us. The government literally cannot go around and force people to take this, because no sooner the government does this, the enlightened one amongst us from your cohort will run off to Duke Street down in the Supreme Court and get some fancy lawyers to argue that your rights have been, so the government cannot do any more. I mean, I was one who was very critical of government initially for not taking some of the stuff, for whatever reason, from Cuba when that came out, and whether or not it was peer reviewed or not. But I can't argue along those lines anymore because the government has made the vaccines available. The point of the matter is people are not taking it. And I don't think the government can do anything else. I mean, the finance minister said that since the start of the COVID, the number of persons who have lost their jobs could fill our national stadium 4 times. Now, let's break that down to see what that means. That means there are persons who are at home who cannot afford, say in a typical family of 3, cannot afford to put food in the cupboards and on the table. Now, I'm sorry, but if that doesn't drive you to the point of saying, as a nation, yeah, we can't afford to allow tourism to fall, where it is 70%. There was a drop of 70% of tourist visitation to our country in 2020, or up to the fiscal year 2021. Now, we can't allow that because tourism and remittances are our highest foreign exchange earners. So all I'm saying to you is the government has put out this data, because I don't know this because someone whispered it into my ear. I went and I checked. What has been the economic impact of COVID on Jamaica? You type that in Google, you can see that. Government can't do anything more, Akeem. It cannot do anything more. That's my honest answer.
All right. And Dr. Duncan, what's your take on this?
All right. It's very difficult in the social media age to combat the misinformation. There's a lot of misinformation. I mean, the WhatsApp messages, Facebook, Twitter, etc. It's very difficult. That's why I think at this point we may have to really think about mandating the vaccines. I think we'll reach the threshold of public education. That's my opinion. I mean, I don't have all the data, but I think with all the disinformation from social media, it's very hard to combat it. I mean, daily I get questions from your age group again, but of course I don't have time. I have my other work to do, but it's very difficult to do anything more. You always can do more, but I mean, it's right now with the deluge of information, disinformation is very difficult at this point. So.
And that's true. And that is why, discussion like Taylor Coffee always very important. Because
yeah, it's important, yeah.
The audience is really my age group. So, we are listening and ready to share the information. So we have some questions coming again from the audience. And can there be some discussion about the chances the virus gets to mutate the longer we operate in the population and the role vaccinations play in this dynamic? Dr. Ennis, Dr. Duncan? Would you like me to read it?
Let me start. So
okay.
The more the virus is allowed to spread, is the more it will mutate. So mutations occur when the virus reproduces. So as they go through their reproductive cycle, and that happens inside of our cells, as they multiply, and they multiply many, many, many times exponentially, that's how they multiply. With every multiplication of self, there is a high chance that a variant is formed. Something goes wrong and something different happens and you get variants. So if they don't have the cell, which is us, our cells, if they can't get into our cells and multiply, then that will reduce the possibility of variants developing. So when you get vaccinated, what tends to happen is that the virus is restricted to your upper airway. It stays there for a little, don't multiply a lot, and dies out before it causes severe problems, because the severity of the problems comes now when it gets down into the lungs and it take root and can start to multiply. So the more persons are vaccinated is the less chance you have of the virus multiplying, which means that you have lowered that temperature, lowered the threshold of variants developing. And that is why we expect, if we're following the science, we're going to expect that because of the inequity in vaccine distribution across the world, it is going to be the poorer countries where you are going to find variants coming fast and furious, because it's the poorer countries that are not anywhere near 60-70% vaccinated.
And as you mentioned the numbers, the 70%, we have a question, and it says, how important is it to get that magical number, 70% of the population vaccinated?
All right, I'll kind of start. All right, so what they want to achieve is called herd immunity, but with this current virus, 70% may actually be not the magical number, it may be actually higher. As Dr. Ennis said before, we got an award for being third best in terms of childhood vaccinations. Jamaica's actually been consistently almost been at 100% for MMR and all the childhood vaccinations, and that is why we've done so well. So I think the magical number 70 may actually be higher, but we need to achieve herd immunity to protect everyone in the population and to prevent the variants from forming. And it's not just in Jamaica, it has to be a worldwide thing. That's why we need equity in terms of vaccination. So the poor countries need to get the vaccines as well. As you see, there are other variants in other, like in the South African countries or etc. So that's the importance of it.
All right. And another question, given that there is a high popularity for Pfizer, when it's time for the booster shot, will there be mixing and matching of vaccines in Jamaica, or would Jamaica consider that, given that the high demand of the Pfizer vaccine?
Let me try. First of all, a lot of persons are saying that there's this high demand for Pfizer. You know, I ran the numbers yesterday. I ran the numbers yesterday, and I looked over the last, since we started administering to persons over 50, when we opened up Pfizer to persons over 50 as well as children. And I've looked at from the 9th of November when we started all the way down. You know, Pfizer and Astra is running pretty keen, you know, especially in the older population. Actually, Pfizer, AstraZeneca is a little higher with uptake in that elderly population. But be that as it may, I guess the young people prefer Pfizer. The World Health Organization at this time has not recommended heterologous vaccines, which is no to Pfizer, Moderna, Pfizer, Astra. They have not recommended that. It's homologous. So if you start with Astra, you finish with Astra. You start with Pfizer, you finish with Pfizer. However, studies have started and a few countries have seen great benefit in the immune response with mixing of a viral vector and a messenger RNA. So that would be a AstraZeneca and a Pfizer. So that is looking possible, but remember, we take our guidance from WHO here. So we're not quite there yet. So maybe we will mix, but at this time, it is same.
Okay. And this question goes to Mr. Mukulu. Mr. Mukulu, earlier you spoke about, we had a discussion about companies and vaccine mandate. The question is it lawfully correct for companies to impose vaccine mandates, though the government themselves have not?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think as some of your viewers and you would have noticed, there was a potential challenge to one particular employer, but it was withdrawn. Suspected parties compromised. In an instance where the state has not felt the need to impose mandatory vaccination, I think an employer, if taken to court, would find it rather difficult to justify that encroachment on someone's constitutional right. Of course, the sector in which the person is working will be ultimately will be relevant. And that's what I would be more interested to, not just a blanket say, well, no, or no, it wouldn't be unconstitutional, or yes, it would be unconstitutional. It would all be determined by the sector in which the person is operating. Someone who works a lot with goats and animals, I can't see how the employer would be in a position to justify that sort of infringement. But again, that's hypothetical. So the straightforward answer is it will be difficult for an employer where the state has not saw the need to impose such a mandatory requirement to go ahead and do that and be successful if taken to court.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mukulu. All right, Dr. Ennis, with the various options of vaccines that are available, how do you know which one is right for you? And does each vaccine have a different level of effectiveness? Talk to us about that.
So let us look at efficacy as opposed to effectiveness. all the vaccines are equally effective. They do what they say they're supposed to do, which is prevent severe illness, hospitalization, and death. So they're all effective. Now, efficacy speaks to the chance of you not getting the disease. So Pfizer, for example, initially boasted a 95% efficacy. So in 95% of the times, you would not contract the disease, okay? As opposed to AstraZeneca, which said that if you took it 8 to 12 weeks, your second dose, then you would be at about a 90% of not being able to contract the disease. And so let us not confuse efficacy with effectiveness, because all of the vaccines are effective. The efficacy now just speaks to your chance of not getting the disease.
Okay. And Dr. Duncan, just to bring in a little bit in the conversation, now, the fact that it has been proven that the vaccine doesn't prevent you from actually catching the virus, why is testing not also required for vaccinated persons? And how does testing only the unvaccinated help to reduce the spread of the virus?
Okay, maybe Dr. Ennis should answer, but I'll try. Okay, so, all right, so in terms, what's the question? Why you don't test vaccinated?
Yes, so given that the vaccine doesn't prevent you from getting the virus, why is it that you only test those who are unvaccinated?
No, man, that's not true. No, man, everyone is tested. So even though you're vaccinated, once you have the symptoms of COVID-19, you're still tested. I mean, I'm vaccinated fully, and I've been tested several times because I've had symptoms consistent but thankfully I've been negative, but you're still tested once you're vaccinated. So that's not quite correct.
All right. So as the risk of blood clots with the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccine being addressed, because certainly this might be a reason why there is an hesitancy when it comes on to both vaccines. At least that's what. Yes, go ahead, doctor.
No, so there is no risk with, there is no recorded risk with Pfizer causing blood clots. Pfizer, the rare side effect that you may get with Pfizer is myocarditis, pericarditis, not blood clots. But let's go to the blood clots, because that was in the news a lot, and a lot of persons are concerned. So it is possible that after you get the AstraZeneca vaccine, you may get a clot. Now let's look at the statistics. Let's look at it. It is not just any clot that you tend to get with AstraZeneca. It is a blood clot that is associated with a low platelet count. So that it's a special category. But outside of that, if we're looking at the statistics, for AstraZeneca, one person out of every 250,000 persons may get a clot. Perspective, 3 million of us here in Jamaica, if every last one of us got AstraZeneca, it is possible that 12 of us may get a clot. Now, when you look at that kind of statistics, it would not be logical for you to halt a program, for you to not give it, because 12 persons in 3 million may get a clot, something that you can treat. But let's look again at another medication, the oral contraceptive pill. Ladies, we swallow it from age 18 to age 50 every single day. The chance of us getting a clot with the oral contraceptive pill is 1 in every 2,500. And I know for sure that if you are 35 years old, if you smoke and you are fat, your doctor is not even going to look at you with the oral contraceptive pill, because your chance of getting a clot will significantly increase. So we have to put things in perspective. Yes, you may get a clot, but these clots can be treated, and it is not so significant that you're going to halt your vaccination program.
All right.
Sorry, on that clotting thing, with my non-medical self. I was listening to some experts speaking today, and I think they've identified in the AstraZeneca vaccine the cause and the source. What is it that is that can lead to, as the doctor said, the rare instance of clotting? So the knowledge on that is developing, and they've now identified how it is and why the clotting can take place, if it does take place, in the rare occasion on which it will take place. But I'm not so sure. I took the AstraZeneca and I'm still unclotted.
That's a good one.
I like that. I like that.
That's certainly a good one. And I'm still with you, Mr. Mukulu. Given the close relationship that we have with our churches in Jamaica, do you think, what role do you think that the churches play in terms of, facilitating this discussion around vaccination?
Well, I think they do have a responsibility, because if only because they have the attention of a large section of our population. So they have a responsibility, one, to get the information, the correct information, and to help to demystify a lot of it that is tied up with all that, what do you call it now? Eschatology, end times, mark of the beast type talk that seems to be dominant in, when I say religious, I'm talking Christian settings now. They have a responsibility. You have the attention of a lot of our persons, a lot of our citizens, and so they have responsibility to get the information, and where possible, to invite the public health experts who can set the help to give their congregation the information so that they can make informed decisions. The fact of the matter is, we don't stand a chance to get back on our feet if our rate of vaccination remains at 17% in March of next year. It's just not going to happen. If you look across the world, where countries have sort of reopened, it's because the take-up rate has been high. It goes without saying. So the churches do have that responsibility, and I'm not suggesting that they have been neglectful of that responsibility. I would not say that, because I don't know, but they do have that responsibility.
Very well, Mr. Mukulu. And let us see now, in terms of, because I want to talk a little bit more on this entire idea of making vaccine mandatory. And I want to get the view of each member of the panel. Do you think if the COVID-19 vaccine becomes mandatory, it will solve our problem? It will solve the problem of hesitancy? Do you believe that?
I don't know if Mr. McCullough wants to speak, but I think it will solve the problem of obviously the take-up, which is what's the aim. I mean, there's always been hesitancy, clearly, with vaccines. I'm sure when Public Health Act 1983 or 1974, I wasn't alive, but I'm sure there was hesitancy then. It's not a new thing. But we have to do something to boost the vaccination rates. Whether it's more public education, I don't know, or where we have to mandate. I'm not a lawyer. I don't know the constitutionality of it, of course, but I think we have to do something else at this point.
Right. But before Mr. Mukula answers that question, and I know he's going to take it from a legal perspective, I just want to share that recently I saw a report from the OEC where a few lawyers, few notable attorneys, actually, they had a discussion about the constitution of many of the OEC countries, and perhaps countries in the Commonwealth Caribbean, making provision, or perhaps having the leadway for vaccination to be mandatory. So, and I know that Mr. Mukulu will shed some light on the constitutionality of vaccination being mandatory. But before he gets to that, I'm just going to ask Dr. Ennis to, give your view. Do you think that mandatory vaccination will solve the problem?
There are many problems that we're trying to solve, and we have to certainly look at it in a holistic fashion. Now, I believe that with education, with public awareness, persons should be able to make the right decision. It really should not be necessary for persons to be forced, but we have the business of the greater good, and that trumps a lot of our personal feelings, views, because we have to look at what will benefit the vast majority of the nation here, and by extension, the rest of the world, because we are in the global village. I believe that if we remain at 17% or anywhere close to that, we pretty much will be ostracizing ourselves from the rest of the world. It is clear that to travel now, you will need to be vaccinated to enter some countries. And it's unfortunate that persons are not safeguarding their health or being their brother's keeper and getting vaccinated, but are only vaccinated because if they don't, they can't travel, they can't go to America. That is unfortunate. And I think when views like those are expressed, we certainly need to be stepping up I don't know how much more really, but that public awareness for persons to take personal responsibility. And after you've taken this personal responsibility, it's collective responsibility, knowing that you can impact the lives of so many other persons.
Yeah, and you mentioned that, to enter the USA and perhaps several other countries, you need to be vaccinated. Do you think that, I know Jamaica is a small island, heavily dependent on tourism, but do you think that perhaps someday we'll reach there when persons who are entering our country has to prove that they're vaccinated?
We may get there. I'm sure this may not be the only pandemic. We're only hoping it's the only one in our lifetime, but maybe not your lifetime. You have a long way to go. But we're going to be, I think, based on how things are looking, we may be seeing more of these, and sovereign states will have to take a stance at some point or the other.
Okay. Mr. Mukula, talk to us now about the constitutionality of making COVID-19 vaccine mandatory.
Well, I mean, if the government wants to do it, the government can do it, because a lot of the law is on its side on this. If you can recall that the Ministry of Health had said, in terms of looking at its vaccination plan, the objective was to reduce the deaths, and I'm reading from the document, reduce the deaths and disease burden in Jamaica caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, secure the continuous functioning of essential services, and reduce socioeconomic disruption. That statement would establish the objective that the Constitution requires anyone who's pushing this forward in the state to establish. It wants to ensure, effectively, in a nutshell, that the public health of the nation is maintained, and to reduce the possibilities of disruption, both socially and economically. So the government will have to establish that objective. Is that objective a legitimate one? Of course it's a legitimate one. And if you remember the case of Julian Robinson and Attorney General, that itself looked at an early and older case from Canada. But our court in Jamaica set out, Justice Sykes set out the sort of test that needs to be established, and the ultimate question that would have to be answered is not just, well, is there a legitimate objective, but also the issue of, is this the least intrusive way of achieving that objective? And I think you'll find that it is the least intrusive, because the other tools that have been tried, the masks, the curfews, they have not been successful. So I think the legal case is watertight for vaccination, because again, those who oppose it might say, well, what about the risk to our health of taking the vaccine? Well, let us not forget what the data is telling us. In I think July of this year, when there was a serious spike in Jamaica, 96% of those who were admitted to the University Hospital of the West Indies with COVID symptoms, none of them were vaccinated. All of them were unvaccinated. So the case has built itself, and I think legally the government can draw on clear data to establish that infringement or encroachment on particular person's religious right or the person's freedom of movement or right to privacy and self-determination. The government can, the legal case is watertight. It is watertight.
All right. Now, this question, and I think it's a two-part question. Now, if I take the vaccine and I have some adverse side effects, apart from the fever, the flu, and all of that, I have some adverse side effect. What should I do? Dr. Ennis and Dr. Duncan and Mr. Mukulu, can I sue the government?
If you do what?
If I take the vaccine, right, and I have some adverse side effects, right? I want to know from Dr. Duncan and Dr. Ennis, what should I do? If I take the vaccine, tomorrow morning I get up, I take the vaccine, and there are some adverse side effects. Apart from just the flu and all that, what should I do? And the follow-up question is to Mr. Mukulu, can I sue the government after taking the vaccine and I have these adverse side effects?
I mean, that question assumes, one, that the vaccine has been administered correctly and properly to you. You can't have a straightforward answer to that question. That particular scenario will be determined by the facts of the case. If you can establish that the adverse impact of the vaccine was foreseeable, the government knew of it or ought to have known of it, then that would establish get you to the door of the court. I'm not so sure it will get you home scot-free. There's much more than that. Well, I woke up and I took the vaccine yesterday and I'm sick and I'm having adverse. We have to show that it was reasonable, foreseeable, that those adverse effects, either they were known by the government at the time or they ought to have been known based on the knowledge that the experts have, the health experts have. I'm not so sure that would be a successful claim, because no vaccine, the doctors will tell you, or no particular medication. You know, people have gotten pregnant having had contraceptions. Those things happen. Those things do happen. People get pregnant with those things. So, but I'm not so sure that would be the best case to advance based on our current knowledge of how the vaccine works.
And Dr. Ennis, adverse side effects from the vaccine. What's my next step?
Well, you most certainly need to seek medical attention. We encourage persons that if the side effects, even the mild ones, if they persist longer than 72 hours, then you make contact with the public system, with your private doctor, note it. So what we do, we have a very robust system that looks at ISAVI, and ISAVI is events supposedly attributable to vaccines or immunization. We have a team of experts that review all the cases of adverse events in an attempt to establish causality. So is it that the vaccine caused the outcome, whatever the sequelae would be? So we do have that. We are linked to the international Digit database, which looks at all the adverse events that occur across the world with now COVID-19 vaccines, but also with all the other vaccines that we have been taking, looking if there are any nuances to our population or whatever. So that system exists, but in order for you to be compensated, causality would need to be established. And we do have a system that looks at our vaccines and adverse events.
All right, we'll be wrapping up right now. So just gonna take the final comment from Mr. Mukulu, then Dr. Duncan, followed by Dr. Ennis. Mr. Mukulu, any final comments?
Oh, he's gone.
I'm not sure. Is he still with us?
Oh, he's there.
He's there.
Mr. Mukulu, any final comments on the topic?
Well, my only final comment is that I really and sincerely hope that those who are hesitant will stop, well, I have no other adjective, the nonsense, and that they will go and get the information, put themselves in a position to get the information on how this thing works, its limitations, and its benefits. If that can't persuade them, get them to read the budget presentation of the finance minister. In 2019-2020, we earned $3.4 billion from tourism. But in 2020 to 2021, we only earned $874 million. That's a lot of money that we're losing out. I'm not going to travel to any country where there's 17%. I will, I'm Jamaican. I'm talking to the tourists that we need to come to our island. And if that translates into good roads, schools, hospitals, more doctors, more nurses, more teachers, more firemen, more policemen, that can persuade them. Think about the children and how it's disrupting their education and how they're losing out. We need to get to that position where we start looking at how our actions in resisting this thing is having consequences down the line for all of us. That's all I have to say.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Mukulu. Dr. Duncan, any final comment?
Well, thank you again, for Taylor, for inviting me. In terms of comments, in terms of the vaccine for young people, we need to encourage, have more forums such as this one to encourage and get more people to ask questions so we can answer them. The vaccines are safe. Everyone needs to take them, especially younger people such as yourself. We need to achieve herd immunity. We also don't want to get long side effects such as long COVID. It does not cause any erectile dysfunction, does not affect your fertility. You can still get pregnant. I just want to encourage people just to take the vaccine, ask questions, ask as much questions as possible. I'm always willing to answer any question once I'm available. And I guess we'll have to continue the public education until we reach the point where we may need to actually mandate it.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Ennis. Before your final comment, now that there's a new variant, the Omicron, that's how it's pronounced?
That's what I hear them saying, Omicron.
Okay.
When I saw it first, I did say Omicron, but I'm hearing Omicron, and I've done some research, and it seems to be Omicron.
Omicron, okay. But do you believe, though, that or should our borders be closed now that there's a new variant? Before you give your final comments, just your thoughts on that.
We have to always look at the bigger picture, look at our resources, and look at what we can withstand. Look at how quickly we can identify, how quickly we can contain. And we do have a deficit. You may recall that our samples, although we have a machine, it's not fully operational, but we do have to send our samples away, and we have to wait to get a response. So countries that can be open would have a high capacity for being able to detect and being able to quickly contain. So when you look at our resources, one of the options really to, be on even keel is to close the borders so that we have some amount of breathing space. Countries that are able to open up their borders freely have greater capacity than we do for detecting and containing.
All right, and final comment?
Based on the knowledge that we have about the vaccines as well as the virus, based on what we have been observing, the deaths, looking at hospitalization, looking at the disruption to our economy, looking at just the anguish that the entire world have been in since 2019. We've got to not be selfish. We now have to embrace the concept of being selfless. It is important for us to continue to garner as much credible information as we can and make the right choice. Make the decision to get vaccinated. You may be hesitant, and that is okay. But if you are presented with the facts and you are observing that the over 7 billion persons in the world have received one of these vaccines, and the vast majority of persons in hospitals are unvaccinated, then what are we waiting on? What are we waiting on? Let us all be selfless, get more information, and most importantly, get out and get vaccinated.
Thank you so much. And I want to thank, Mr. Mukulu is no longer with us, but certainly I want to thank him for coming out. But, you know, especially I want to thank Dr. Ennis and Dr. Duncan. I know you all are fighters in the pandemic, certainly as frontline workers. And we just want to say thank you so much for coming out. Thank you for being brave enough. You know, thank you for risking your life every day to save us, to save all Jamaicans. And certainly we appreciate it. And on behalf of the TLR administration, the all executive committee, and all members of TLR, we want to say thank you. And to those who would have joined us on YouTube, thank you for coming out. And certainly let us continue to have this discussion around vaccination. Let us encourage each other to get vaccinated. So let's get vaccinated and get back to life. Thank you. Have for yourself a productive afternoon.
Thank you.